Thomas Jefferson said the U.S. Constitution should expire when the last founder died. And it's also true that George Washington expected the Constitution to last no more than 20 years. Now, what if they were right? What if the Constitution did expire? What would happen today with the political upheaval that's taking place in America, with both sides relying on the Constitution to justify their positions? A new political thriller imagines what might happen if the United States had to hammer out a whole new Constitution today. Who would we entrust to that monumental task? Who is today's George Washington or Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, or Thomas Jefferson? What would happen to our country if indeed our treasured Constitution was no longer in force? That's our topic today with John Boykin, author of the new political thriller, The Constitution Has Expired. So stay with us.
Welcome to Lean to the Left, home of no-holds-barred commentary, plus interviews with fascinating people, some of them top experts, others simply with interesting stories to tell. You'll never know who'll show up at Lean to the Left. Now here's your host, Bob Gaddy.
Something had been troubling John Boykin for decades. If the American form of government was the best in the world, why didn't other countries emulate it? And while the U.S. Constitution was proving nearly impossible to even amend, emerging countries were writing their own constitutions from scratch. What if the U.S. had to do that all over again? This became the premise of The Constitution Has Expired. Though the book is fiction, Boykin researched it as carefully as his award-winning nonfiction books. His nonfiction book, One Brief Miracle, told the inside story of American diplomat Philip Habib's mission to stop the 1982 Israeli siege of Beirut. Former Secretary of State George Shultz wrote the foreword, and the book won the American Academy of Diplomacy Book Award under its hardcover title, Cursed is the Peacemaker. You can learn more about both books at applegatellc.com. John, thanks for joining us today. I truly appreciate it. Thank you, buddy.
Happy to be here.
Now, The Constitution Has Expired starts out with a young woman studying the original of the Constitution at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and discovering, unbelievably, that Article 5 contained a sentence stating that the Constitution would expire 100 years after its establishment, something that no one had ever noticed before. Now, that would mean that the Constitution, as we know it, is no longer in force, having expired in the mid-1800s. What would be the implications of that, John?
Be unthinkable. It's unimaginable what would happen. And that's exactly what made this an interesting book to write, because I wanted to see if I could think through the unthinkable. What would happen for sure is a contest between chaos and inertia. Chaos because nobody would know what to do, and inertia because we tend to assume, oh, we'll just muddle through. This thing has been there. The Constitution has been there for so long that we have no concept of what else we would do. Yeah. Who would be in charge? Are the laws still valid? Is the money still good? Are we still a country? Is it the same 50 states? It would be chaos on steroids.
Wow. You say there are three key failings of the Constitution. John, what are they?
I'll give you four. The first is quick and simple. They made it nearly impossible to amend. It's the oldest constitution, not because it's the best, but because it's virtually impossible to amend. And second is states as a unit of measurement. For most other things, voting for governor, voting for mayor, voting for propositions on the ballot, individual voters are the unit of measurement. But for the federal government, states are the unit of measurement. And I understand why they did that in 1787, but it makes no sense anymore. Wyoming has 600,000 people. California has 40 million people. Both states get 2 votes in the U.S. Senate. And what we're watching in the presidential election that's going on right now is somebody's trying to win a state. Exactly why does it make sense to win a state? Exactly why should 2 states called Iowa and New Hampshire pretty much determine who's going to be the nominee? The Constitution sets up states as the unit of measurement. The third thing, so the first is virtually impossible to amend. The second is states as a unit of measurement. Mm-hmm. The third is political parties. You cannot talk about federal government or politics for 30 seconds without mentioning Democrats and Republicans. And yet the Constitution is absolutely stone silent about political parties. There is not a syllable anywhere in the Constitution about political parties, what they can do, what they have to do, how they should interrelate, what their limitations are. Nothing about it. Because, and that's not the founders' fault, when they wrote the Constitution in 1787, there was no such thing as a political party. They came along a few years later, but it's never been amended to address political parties. And the fourth thing, so there's hard to amend, states as a unit of measurement, political parties, and the fourth is there's no referee. What we have is a rule book for an individual sport like tennis or golf, when in fact government is a team sport like basketball or football. And the Constitution talks about the teams. And there's no referee. The players are free to make up the rules as they go, or break them or ignore them. Probably the most notable example was 4 years ago I guess it was 8 years ago, when President Obama nominated a Supreme Court Justice, Merrick Garland, and the majority leader of the Senate, an office that does not exist in the Constitution, decided, no, we're not going to take it up.
Yeah.
We'll just not do that. So the players get to make up the rules as they go because there's no referee.
That's an interesting point. Never thought about that. So
now, we like to think that the Supreme Court is the referee, and in a certain very limited sense they are. But how long ago was the 2000 election? And the Supreme Court is only now getting around to deciding whether a foul was committed. Can you imagine a football game with no referee on the field calling fouls as they happen?
Yeah. Yeah. And the Supreme Court, unfortunately, has become political. It shouldn't be, but it is.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a joke.
Yeah.
When you can predict with about 80%, 90% certainty how a Supreme Court justice is going to rule on a given case, then that's not the kind of person you should have serving on the Supreme Court.
No, exactly right. How has the Constitution been eviscerated by partisanship, do you think?
The founders had one piece of absolute genius, and that was the idea of checks and balances. The problem is that since this was 1787, before political parties arose, they counted on institution A to be a check and balance on institution B. So like the Congress and the president and the Supreme Court or the judiciary being a check and balance as institutions. And that works fine until you introduce political parties into the mix, at which point it gets all but thrown out the window. For example, was there ever any doubt that the Democrat-led House of Representatives was going to impeach Donald Trump 4 years ago? No. Was there ever any doubt that the Republican Senate was going to acquit him? No. Because their partisan allegiances took priority over any sense of checks and balances.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment states that no person can serve in political office if they had engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. Now, do you believe that should prevent Donald Trump from seeking the presidency?
It prevents him from occupying the presidency. And one of the tragedies of the Supreme Court ruling that came down on March 5th
Mm-hmm.
about his eligibility under the 14th Amendment was
Right.
they completely missed the point of Section 3. I think March 5th marks the official formal death of the pretense of originalism that has become an article of faith among candidates or prospective nominees for the Supreme Court. They stood Section 3 on its head.
Mm.
I would encourage everybody to actually read the full text of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. No, because people usually stop reading about halfway through. The
Mm-hmm.
most important sentence is the last sentence. Section 3 doesn't define how you determine whether somebody engaged in insurrection or not. It just assumes. But the final sentence says, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So the text of it only addresses how to remove the disability or the ineligibility. And the Supreme Court just stood that on its head by saying, oh, Congress has to basically declare that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection in order to render him ineligible, which is exactly the opposite of what it says.
Is this an example of how Trump has stacked the Supreme Court in his favor?
Oh, absolutely. And you, the founders set up the Supreme Court justices to have lifetime tenure. The theory was that that would make them independent and
Mm-hmm.
free them from political influence. But when Supreme Court justices are chosen precisely for their ideology,
Mm-hmm.
then independence becomes academic. Nobody needs to put political pressure on Samuel Alito or Clarence Thomas
Right.
to get them to vote a particular way on a particular case from their ideology, how they're going to vote.
Right.
And yeah, Donald Trump stacked it in his favor, and they have already started serving him well.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right. In your book, you're critical of both political parties. Does that mean you don't believe in the two-party system? And if not, what's your solution?
There's no such thing as a two-party system. That is a myth that has grown up over the years because we have generally had two parties
Right.
and they have made sure that no third or fourth parties can get on the stage. The founders who wrote the Constitution gave us a
Mhm.
no party system
Yeah.
because they didn't have political parties then. George Washington took office with no opposition. James Monroe was elected president with no opposition. If
Okay.
you've heard of the era of good feelings,
Yeah.
there was basically one political party, or more accurately, no political parties at that time. It is true that we have usually had two political parties, and they have reified their stranglehold on politics,
Yeah.
but it's profoundly harmful. All of the incentives are conducive to making people more extreme rather than more cooperative. And that's a tragedy for the country.
Yeah, that's been that extremism has been growing in recent years. And I remember I'm up in years and I worked on Capitol Hill in the 70s, in the late 70s. And I worked for both a Republican and then I worked for a Democratic member of the House of Representatives. I was chief of staff for both. And my recollection of those days is that my bosses were able to work with members of the other party easily to reach a conclusion that really was intended, at least, to be in the best interest of the majority of the people.
Yeah.
That's not the case today. They
No,
don't do that. And
no.
it's just incredible to me.
I think the prevailing assumption is that politicians are in it for power. And
Yeah.
I think that is only a part of that's only partly true. It certainly is the case in a lot of often, but power is only a means to an end. You want power so that you can accomplish something.
Yeah.
You can get some kind of policy through or something. The the prevailing imperative is not really power per se, it's asses in chairs. It's how do I keep my ass in my chair? How, how can I get enough money to keep my ass in my chair? How
Uh-huh.
can I get my ass in a better chair? That is the game.
I've never heard it put that way, but but it's a fact. Asses in chair.
It's not even money. There's a lot of concern about bribery, and the founders were concerned about bribery,
Mm,
and bribery assumes that, oh, I politician me, I'm going to get money for something, but that's the most effective kind of bribery now is not I will give you dollar bills, but I will run ads on your behalf so
hmm.
that you can keep your ass in your chair. I will I will donate money to your campaign. I
Yeah.
will do this and that, all so that you can keep your ass in your chair.
I live in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and the ads here when Nikki Haley was up until the South Carolina Republican primary.
Yeah.
Nikki Haley had some really good ads, I thought. And one of them was all about keeping your ass in your chair. And it started a chicken. And the only thing that in this ad was just a chicken going across the screen going, and the voiceover said that Trump was a chicken because he wouldn't debate Nikki Haley. And of course, that was her effort to keep her ass in her chair or get her ass in the chair, you could
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
SFA Foundation is
Then
responsible
Trump
for the
came back
content of
with
this
a
advertising.
counter ad, also with a chicken. The chicken looked just like Nikki Haley's chicken. And his ad was put a fork in her because she's done. And it was just a chicken. I just thought it was a scream.
Absolutely every single thing about how somebody becomes president is ridiculous.
Yeah.
We're so used to it that we never give it a second thought.
Yeah.
In 1800, the political campaign, but the presidential campaign between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson
Yeah.
consisted of John Adams giving a speech.
Giving
Thomas
what?
Jefferson wrote some letters.
Okay.
That was the presidential campaign in 1800. And now
Uh,
it's this massive, grotesque, obscene
oh, yeah.
machine
Oh, yeah.
and whatever it takes to win. And by win, it's not, I frankly ignore any poll that I see of national sentiment because the only sentiment that really matters is in the battleground states.
Hmm.
Uh, I live in California. The Democrat is going to win the state of California, period. Doesn't matter
Right.
who it is.
Okay.
In Wyoming, the Republican is going to win.
Hmm.
Doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah. And that's
And
how it is
so,
in South Carolina, too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the value of your vote depends on where you live.
Uh-huh.
And if you are a Republican in California, your vote for president quite literally does not count. If you
Hmm.
are a Democrat in Wyoming, your vote for president quite literally does not count.
Yeah.
Your vote counts only if you are in a battleground state, which is defined as more or less 50-50.
Hmm.
And that's where the candidates devote the vast majority of their energy
Hmm.
trying to get a few more votes here or a few more votes there can tip the balance because we have this ridiculous system called winner take all. 48 out of the 50 states have a winner take all system. And so if you get, I'm not sure it even has to be a majority, even a plurality, you get 100% of the electoral votes. Why? Because the Constitution created this cockamamie thing called the Electoral College
Yeah.
that no generation has ever had the wherewithal to abolish.
Yeah, I wanted to get into the Electoral College and ask you why is it that let the voters decide is just heartwarming humbug that ignores the Electoral College? And thanks for feeding me that line, that heartwarming humbug line. I really like.
It's not, it certainly is the way it should be. And it's
Mm,
heartwarming because it's the way it should be. We've all been told 1,000 times every vote counts.
right.
Well, actually, every vote does not count
Yeah.
unless you live in the right place. You, Bob Getty, and I do not elect a president. A
Right.
president is elected by the Electoral College, which
Right.
is 538 people that nobody knows who they are.
Right.
Nobody knows how they got those assignments. They're
Mm-hmm.
not really accountable to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
They never meet as a total group. The Electoral College was a last minute compromise by the founders at the Constitutional Convention. They looked at various ways that the president might take office, and they didn't like any of them. But they settled on the Electoral College as James Madison put it, as the one liable to the fewest objections. And it was explicitly a compromise to the slave holding states. In one of his writings, I think it was Federalist 10, James Madison says in so many words, it was on account of the Negroes because they couldn't vote in the southern states.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you had a straight popular vote for president, then what do you do about slaves who are not allowed to vote? And do you
Right.
count them in one way but not in another way? And so the Electoral College is absolutely a child of the slavery system. We managed to abolish slavery in the 1860s, but no generation has ever gotten around to abolishing its child, the Electoral College. We almost did 50 years ago. It was the closest we've ever come, but it got filibustered by a couple of segregationist senators. And the filibuster is not in the Constitution. We could talk about that, but the Electoral College is an abomination. And everything in the news in this election year, everything is because of this ridiculous thing called the Electoral College. Subtract that, and the news would be much less.
That, and you wouldn't have Trump wouldn't have had the Trump and his supporters wouldn't have had the what they consider to be the option to send alternate electors,
Yeah, yeah.
which is,
Um,
was their strategy to overturn the election. Hey, use these electors, not the ones that are legit, but use our electors,
Yeah, whether
right?
you like Donald Trump or you hate him, the fact is that his energies are 100% targeted on the Electoral College.
Yeah.
He has made no effort that I'm aware of to appeal to the American people as a whole. He has expressed no interest in being the president of the American people as a whole. He's very much interested in being the head of his cult of personality. The thing about, to go back to the idea of let the people decide, let the people vote, if it were our decision to make who the president is, Donald Trump would never have gotten in the White House in the first place.
That's
The
true.
American people have voted against him twice.
Hmm.
One time, enough of them lived in the right places
Hmm.
to keep the Electoral College from handing it to him. And the
Hmm.
first time, there were enough people living in the right places that the Electoral College did hand it to him.
Hmm.
The only thing that makes sense is, given our presidential system, is a straight popular vote like we have for pretty much every other office under the sun. But you cannot, you virtually cannot amend the Constitution because the founders made it so hard.
That's really a good point. And if you would think that the most important office in the land would be chosen by popular vote, every other school board members are chosen by popular vote.
Yep,
County commissioners are popular vote. Dog
yep.
catchers, if there's any place where a dog catcher is elected. It's incredible. And yet the president of the United States is elected through this cockamamie, crazy system that has all these holes and doesn't really. My wife says to me, why should I vote? It's the Electoral College that's going to elect this guy or not. Why should I vote? How do you answer that question?
Her vote matters only if she lives in the right place. Now,
Yeah.
I don't have the list of battleground states changes over time. So I'm not sure whether South Carolina is considered a battleground state now or
No,
not.
no, it's not. It's not.
Okay. In that case, no, her vote does not matter.
Yeah.
My vote in California does not matter. However, you live in one of those battleground states like Michigan or Pennsylvania or whoever the current ones are, Georgia, then your vote counts very much because you, my friend, are voting on steroids.
Yeah.
Your vote counts for exponentially more than mine does.
Oh, wait a minute now. If you vote in California, your vote counts if you vote for the Democrat, right?
Yes, but it is 100% predictable that the
Right.
Democrat is going to win in
Right.
California, whether
Right.
I vote for him or not.
So in that Senate race, which is what, Adam Schiff against now Steve Garvey,
Yeah,
the former baseball player.
yeah.
Garvey doesn't have a prayer, right?
No, because it's a statewide election, and
Yeah.
the only reason it's down to those two is because the Democratic vote was split
Uh-huh.
between Adam Schiff and I'm not trying to remember her name, Katie Porter. Katie Porter would have been very good.
Uh-huh.
Adam Schiff would be very good,
Uh-huh.
but it split the vote. It split the Democratic vote, and Garvey got the most quantity, got the largest quantity of votes, but that's
Mhm.
because the Democrats are split between two. In the general election, no, it's Garvey doesn't have a prayer.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's really good to hear anyway.
Now that said,
Not that we want
California
to be
has
political here or anything like that, but
now that said, California has sent Republicans to the Senate before, and
mhm.
it will again. It's
Yeah.
just not going to happen this year.
Yeah, okay. All right. How has your research into the Constitution affected your view of government dysfunction?
It has shown me that the government dysfunction is directly attributable to the Constitution.
Okay.
All of this dysfunction is not despite the Constitution, it is because of the inadequacies of the Constitution. The difficulty of amending it. The Electoral College has profoundly warped and perverted our politics from the beginning. Anyway, when I started, when I started my research on this, I expected that it was going to deepen my appreciation for the genius of the Constitution. After all, that's the term that you hear all the time about the
Yeah,
Constitution. Oh, the genius of the founders, the genius
yeah,
of this, the genius of that.
right.
Much to my surprise, did not find very much genius in there. What I found was a lot of things that are the reason for our dysfunction today. And so I came to realize that the problem is the Constitution. Now, that's easy for me to say. What do you do about that? It's like a bad parent. We're stuck with it. Like
Mhm.
it or not, for better, for worse, it's what we're stuck with.
Yeah.
So we need to make the best of it. But one reason I wanted to write this book was to jar people's thinking enough from just the myopic focus on the way things presently are to what if it weren't that way? What if it were some other way? Suppose we did this instead of that. Suppose we did things this way instead of that way.
Yeah.
And I don't imagine that my book is going to be the blueprint for the next Constitution of the United States,
You don't
although
know.
it should be. But
Well, I think it should be too,
but I hope that smarter political minds than mine will take it and come up with better ideas than I came up with.
but yeah. Okay. I want to talk a little bit more about your book. Now, the subtitle is a novel, really, probably. What the hell is that all about?
When I've gone to parties and gatherings and talked to people about, I'm writing this book called The Constitution Has Expired,
Uh,
invariably somebody over there will say, it has. And
okay.
I, I have to say, it's a novel. It really hasn't.
Yeah.
But so I felt like I needed to say it's a novel. But the more I researched it, the more plausible it became. I thought I was having the Constitution expire. I thought that was this crazy idea that I pulled out of thin air.
Right.
And I did. But
Uh,
as it turns out, if it had expired, if there
uh-huh.
had been an expiration clause built into it,
Right.
we would not be at all surprised. It would be completely consistent with other things that were known about it back then. For example, Jefferson, I think you quoted, said that it should last only until the last founder died.
Yeah.
Washington said in so many words, "I don't expect it to last more than 20 years."
Mhm.
The the Constitution was written in 1787. The Declaration of Independence was only 11 years earlier. The Articles of Confederation, which was the previous equivalent of a constitution, was only 6 years old. The oldest state constitution at that point was only 13 years old. So there's no reason to think that the founders imagined that this thing was going to last forever. They had no more crystal ball than you and I do. We treat them as though they were these glorious visionaries.
Yeah.
They did have a lot of theories
Yeah.
of, if we do this, then that'll be incentive for that to happen. And they were right about some of them, and they were dead wrong about others. And they
Mm.
disagreed about those all the time. The fact
Yeah.
that they wound up settling on this theory instead of that theory doesn't mean that it was right. It's just the
Yeah.
compromise they made.
You picked the idea of having this young girl who I guess she had some kind of uh,
Hyperlexia.
yeah, is that what it was?
Yeah.
Hyperlexia. At any rate, she was really smart. She focused on this. She read the original while she was standing there with people all around her trying to get her to move and everything. And she spotted this sentence that said that the Constitution would expire 100 years after it was enacted.
Yeah.
And no one had ever seen that before. How did you come up with the idea of using somebody like her to set the stage for this whole book?
The idea of the discrepancy between the handwritten constitution that the founders actually signed
Yeah.
and the printed one that people have been reading ever since, that was at the beginning of the concept. The fact is that there were, if you're familiar with the term version control, it's a big problem in the technology world, I can promise you. There was a calligrapher who was writing the text of the Constitution by hand on parchment for the
Mhm.
founders to actually sign with quill, pen, and ink.
Okay.
There was also a printer who was doing a printed copy that they would have to take home with it. The minute they signed the Constitution parchment, it got rolled up and put in a dark closet. And it stayed in various dark closets for 137 years. Nobody ever compared the two. After the Constitutional Convention adjourned, nobody ever sat down and compared the two.
Mhm.
And my idea was, suppose they had put it into the original parchment that they signed,
Mhm.
and through some kind of oversight, it just didn't make it into the printed one. And
Mhm.
so that's the scenario that is the premise for the whole
Mhm.
book. And a good chunk of the book is dedicated to teasing out how that could actually happen. And I needed it to be plausible. And the
Mhm.
best way I know to make something plausible is to make it actual. And so I researched all of this very carefully, down to the smell of the ink
Okay.
that the calligrapher used.
Right.
And if it's, I certainly took liberties with the facts, but it's very plausible this could have happened.
Yeah.
And so I just play out, okay, what if it had?
Well, I think it's a remarkable thing that you take a concept like that and turn it into a novel, really based on, you can't say based on fact, but based on what could be fact. And I found it to be extremely well done and interesting, and highly recommend you guys, if you can pick this book up, you should. And that reminds me, where can people find it?
It's on Amazon right now.
Okay.
There's information about it at constitutionnovel.com. If you go into Amazon and look for The Constitution Has Expired,
Hmm.
it's there as paperback, as an ebook, and as an audiobook.
Yeah, you just did the audiobook, right?
It will be on other places later, but right now it's only on Amazon.
Okay, excellent. And the book was published 1st of March, right?
Yes, so it's brand new out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Like I said, guys, if you have a chance, check it out and pick it up. If you're interested in history, if you're interested in current affairs, if you're interested in politics, all those things, check it out. So, have you got anything else you'd like to add, John?
Yeah, I would just add that this is not a civics lesson.
Yeah.
The book is not It's not a political screed. It's not a civics lesson. It deals with government and politics, but it's a novel.
Yeah.
And a novelist's first job is to entertain.
Yeah.
And if you don't write an entertaining story, then nothing else matters.
Yeah.
Now, it so happens that there are some real significant issues that the book touches on, but the news is not a civics lesson in government. The news is stories. And so this book, The Constitution Has Expired, is very much a story of characters grappling with an unthinkable crisis. And how did he do it? How did they work through it? What did they come up with? Why that? And that was the fun of writing it. And frankly, for me, it was an escape from the real world of all the horrible things going on in government and politics today. This was, for me, very much an escape into, call it a fantasy, but it's grounded in facts and reality.
Okay. John, thanks so much for joining us on the Lean to the Left podcast. I really did enjoy talking to you about this. And as I said before, you guys, pick this book up. It's well worth your time. It's a good book. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob.
Hey, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Lean to the Left video and you found it interesting and informative. Please visit on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that focus on progressive politics and the important social issues of our time. Now, our interview shows stream on Mondays with special episodes on Thursdays. And you can check out upcoming shows, guests, and topics at podcast.leantotheleft.net. Subscribe to our audio version there and to our video shows here at YouTube. And follow us on social media. Facebook at Bob Gaddy and the Lean to the Left podcast. Now, it's two. Bob Gaddy is one Facebook page, and the Lean to the Left podcast is a second Facebook page. Twitter at Lean to the Left 1, Instagram at Lean to the Left 1, TikTok at Lean to the Left, LinkedIn at Bob Gaddy, and YouTube at Lean to the Left. Now, I hope you'll support Lean to the Left as well so we can keep things going. Just click on the Donate tab at the top of the leantotheleft.net homepage and contribute by buying me a cup of coffee. That'll really help and would be much, much, much appreciated. Now, this is Bob Gaddy signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.